this is the continuing standoff between India and China at the LAC. Now, reports emerged quoting satellite imagery that China seems to be back at the disputed area with even more reinforcements. Meanwhile, consensus is emerging very clearly that one strong message that needs to be given to China is economically. But how? And are trade barriers really the way to do this? We're saying this at a time when there's several news reports pointing to the possibility that the Indian government is using various methods to send across a message to China and also to restrict the amount of imports that come in. It's no secret now that India is very highly dependent on Chinese imports. The balance of trade is way off, and cutting the flow at one go is not an option. So what's been happening? There have been more stringent checks of consignments coming in from China. In fact, the FIO, which is the Federation of Indian Exporters, has come back and said that please tell us clearly what's happening. We're afraid of retaliatory measures from China and Hong Kong on the other way. There are reports that the BIS, that's the Bureau of Indian Standards, is putting together a list of products that we import from China. There's also a push, and it came from the finance minister herself, that we need to now find local alternatives. To what extent can this help? And is the true border and the true dispute going to be an economic one? To speak more on this, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Arvind Panagariya, of course, top economist and first VC of the Niti Aayog. Mr. Panagariya, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Always pleasure for me too, Tamanna. I'm glad to be back.
An excellent piece on what India can do. I just want to get your take first on the whole trade barrier. So clearly everyone knows that we can't get up tomorrow and say no to a whole lot of Chinese imports. We're part of the WTO, a whole lot of other trade agreements. But what can we do and what should we do?
See, I thought about this issue for quite a while before I wrote that piece. And my thinking also went along as I edited the piece multiple times. And where I come out really is that for us, the best course now is, in the short run, well, first, what we really need, I think, at the end of the day, in the longer run, is to be a very, very strong economy. The principal reason why China is flexing its muscles all around is its economy is $14 trillion today. Remember that there have been several decades that China has laid low. We have had peaceful existence. And this sudden change, well, it's not so sudden because once China got to about 10 trillion, which was in 2014, but even, as it was getting to that mark, it had already begun hostilities on various fronts or around its border, including its border with India. And we need to be equally strong. You see, without that, ultimately, in a variety of areas, including confronting China, we will be sort of operating from a base of weakness. So that's a principal kind of objective that drives my thinking now. And for that, then, the immediately what we have to do, we are still less than 3 trillion. So getting to about 10 trillion is still far. So I say in the short run, let's forge whatever kind of close relationships we need to forge with the United States, Japan, and Australia, the Quad countries. And we'll have to deal with China, I think, more kind of politically, diplomatically, and strategically. In the longer run, if we want to distance ourselves from China economically, the best way to do it is not trade sanctions right now. And we can come and talk about it, why I think so. Yeah. But to forge free trade agreements with like-minded countries, particularly developed countries. We could go to United Kingdom, European Union, Canada. It will be ideal if we could actually start with the United States, but I see serious kind of roadblocks in an FTA with the United States. But that ought to be our way to distance ourselves from China. Let's forging better.
Dr. Panagariya, the problem is that a lot of things that we depend on China from, to import from, are because they are the cheapest at that value, at that price value. And looking for alternatives is something a lot of the world is doing. APIs, for example. So either we start making much more, or where do we go around looking for these things? A lot of electrical components that go into your end product, electronics, or in the auto sector. There is a whole bucket list of items that right now we don't have an alternative for.
Right? No, absolutely. I think, and if we don't have the alternative anywhere in the world, I think it's heroic for us to think that we can stop those imports from China and produce ourselves. Right? I mean, if hardly any other country is able to supply at a reasonable price, to think that we will be able to do it domestically ourselves is also a bit heroic. I mean, so that is why if we go and begin to stop these imports from coming in, we end up hurting ourselves too. I mean, maybe we'll inflict some injury on China, but in the process, we'll also end up hurting ourselves. So this is, of course, one reason, but there are many other reasons why these trade sanctions on China right now is not a good idea.
No, you make the point well when you say that exports from India are about 3% of what China, imports. So they're not really going to be hurt by us stopping their imports in any case, isn't it?
Yeah. Plus, look, it is a very aggressive, belligerent power, and it feels sufficiently secure economically today to stand up to the United States. United States imports extremely large proportion of the Chinese goods. If our imports from China account for maybe 3% of Chinese exports total, US is probably 10 times that. I haven't checked the figure, but it's a very large figure. And if China could really stand up to the United States and not kind of bend and retaliated, it'll certainly retaliate against us. And for us, remember that, our exports in absolute terms are smaller, but as a proportion of our own total exports, we export about 5.8% to China.
Yeah, which is why our exporters are worried. Okay, let's just take a look at a couple of things. And let me start with what has been done so far. I listed a couple of factors that the Indian government and administration is looking at. One of them, of course, is also on e-commerce sites to start identifying where the goods are coming from, strictures on certain categories of imports. Do you think all of this will help send a message across at the very least?
I very seriously doubt. Look, a country that's belligerently standing against us on the border militarily is not going to respond in any effective way to these measures, whose impact largely ends up on our own soil, right? I mean, a lot of this injury we are inflicting on ourselves, not on the Chinese. For the Chinese, this is very tiny. It's just very tiny, you see. I mean, you can see total exports to India from China are 3%. Now, when you take these little measures, what impact can it possibly have, down on the Chinese, and particularly the leadership that's sitting at the top? So I personally don't think that sends out a great deal of message. I'm also a little concerned, whether our general sense of, that we want to do import substitution is also getting mixed up with these measures we think we are taking against China. But the overall objective is, in fact, to import substitute. So if that is the instinct driving us, which we are then sort of packaging it as an action against China, then of course some very different game is at play here. Particularly when you say that standards, right? I mean, if we are going after the standards under the WTO rules, frankly speaking, unless the government says that I'm going to invoke the national security clause which I have not heard yet anybody say, you can't do it in a discriminatory way against China only. The standards under the WTO rules have to be enforced on the domestic products equally. And I'm sure, similar products that we sell domestically don't meet those standards. So, I mean, I don't even understand when the Commerce Ministry says I'm going to enforce these standards on the goods that are coming from abroad. What is it going to do in terms of enforcing the exact same standards on the domestically supplied goods? Because otherwise it is WTO inconsistent. And in effect, we can be challenged in the WTO for that.
Okay, a lot of this is also about sentiment, and the sentiment is very clearly, anti-Chinese goods right now. There is no two things about it. So you have all of these calls for boycott. More and more people may not be ditching Chinese products. That's not happening yet, but there are more inquiries about what the origin of the item is. Do you think all of this makes sense? And will it actually push towards a Make in India sort of movement more than any other effort before?
Yeah. So look, I mean, what people do really doesn't bother me. I think people have the right to consume what they or purchase what they think is right product for them. And if the fact that a product has originated in China offends me, then I should be perfectly free to reject that product from my consumption basket. And if I'm willing to pay a higher price for the alternative, that is fine. I don't worry about that. In fact, I also don't worry too much about the government procurement policy, because government procurement is also, in any case, not a part of, we are not signatories to the government procurement agreement in the WTO. And so we are well within our rights when we discriminate against foreign sourced products in the government procurement. So all that is okay with me. I've also, actually, there's not enough space to say in this Times of India piece, but if, for example, also we see some threat to our national security in going for 5G with Huawei, and for that reason we choose not to go for Huawei, that is okay also, because national security clearly takes precedence over any other economic considerations. So that too would be okay, but only if we seriously feel that there is a national security threat. Because at the end of the day, if that is not the reason, then we are probably hurting ourselves by going for a much more expensive system and so forth. So those are subtleties of things. But what on trade side, I don't see a case for us to kind of disrupt our supply chains.
Let me then come to Atmanirbhar Bharat. And it's interesting because Atmanirbhar Bharat is essentially going back to the Make in India campaign. It has the resonance of the Make in India campaign, which we saw in 2014. Then we have seen Atmanirbhar Bharat come about after the COVID pandemic as a way to pull up our economy. We're talking about Atmanirbhar even more now so in the context of China. But what really is the plan here? And that really is my question/concern. Have we truly come up with any out of the box or feasible sort of idea to make this happen? Why would people buy products made in India if they are not of the same quality or value? Have we done enough to encourage our industry to grow further? Have we removed the impediments that everyone faces? And you have been part of that whole machinery of planning. Can you give us an insight into where we seem to be getting stuck with the planning? It's the same 2-3 point formula we keep coming back to, and import substitution and trade barriers is one of them.
Yeah, no, I think for a very long time we did not do import substitution, and we systematically moved away from it. After 1991, we continued to liberalize, and all the way up to 2007-8, we knocked down the tariffs, and our top tariff by 7-8 had come down to 10%, except with some exceptions of auto and textiles industry. Some exceptions were there, which were higher, but otherwise all tariffs had been, and our average tariff rate had come down to about 11-12%. But last 3 years, I would say, is roughly when we have returned to this import substitution mantra. That is worrisome, and we have talked about it on a number of different occasions earlier. But now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, I mean, is this really a new call for import substitution? At this point, I'm not willing to take a call on it because I don't see anything that the government has actually done after that speech by the Prime Minister on, I think it was May 12th, when he talked about Atmanirbhar Bharat. In terms of the actual policy measures, I don't think that, in fact, if you read the Atmanirbhar Bharat package itself that the finance minister subsequently announced in 5 press conferences from May 13th to May 17th, you'll see that there's one section which says that Atmanirbhar defense. And one of the key measures announced there is that the defense investment in defense through automatic route can come up to 74%. And so they raised the limit from 49 to 74%. So there was clearly sort of opening the defense sector wider to foreign investors, not close it down. So in terms of the measures, I don't see, and so far, other than some noises which still are at the level of media reporting, I don't see that any big action to disrupt trade particularly has been taken.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing about understanding what is Atmanirbhar Bharat. So it's been made clear again and again that this does not mean we become isolationist and cut off from the world and don't engage with the rest of the world. Quite the contrary. The idea is supposed to be to produce at global levels and become a producer to the world, etc. It all sounds very great, but what do you think the formula should be? What are the steps that are needed to actually move in this direction?
Yeah, so look, to me, the Atmanirbhar Bharat is a $10 trillion economy. I think that really ultimately is the self-confident and self-reliant India. And we should do everything that we can to get to that as quickly as possible. And being very open economy has got to be a very important part of it. We have talked many times, others also say this, that look, no country has successfully done that. Meaning, growing at 8 to 10%, which is what we need today, without being very open. So clearly, and by the way, also on this whole business of sanctions, right now for us, it's going to hurt us very badly because we started first, we went into COVID with an extremely fragile financial sector, which has finally reflected itself in this latest growth rate for 1920, which is 4.2%. Quite, after 4.2% is the lowest in many, many years, probably, since the early 2000s. And so we already went in a weak state into COVID, and then COVID was another big blow. And now, if we add to that disruption through these sanctions and so forth, our recovery back is going to be obstructed very badly. And we need to very quickly get back to at least our 7.5% growth trajectory. So we need to head there. So self-reliance, confident India, we have to do things that would actually, allow growth to happen, allow, release the animal spirits of the businessmen, of the entrepreneurs. That's what we need to do.
Maybe viewers listening to this would be wondering that these people are talking about a $10 trillion economy. We've had a forecast from the IMF just yesterday saying India is going to plunge by 4.5%. We have a very gloomy picture painted in front of us. How do you reconcile both of these measures? And is there any kind of sense you have of the horizon that we're looking at till we emerge from the COVID pandemic? We've unlocked now, and this is as close to the new normal as we're going to get in the foreseeable future till a vaccine, etc., comes on board.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll get to a better, the real normal, once the vaccines come out and we are able to vaccinate about 60 to 65% of the population. And under optimistic scenarios, that could happen by, the end of this fiscal year. so that we can start 21-22 at the full scale that existed before COVID. That's how I see it. Now, the IMF growth rate forecast, of course, everybody is forecasting, and this is a moving target. We will not know till the end, and I have not therefore tried to do any forecast on this. What I would say is that my own horizon is more like, a 15-year horizon over which we ought to get to 10 trillion. And that is certainly a feasible target. That is, and remember that once the economy begins to grow at 10%, everybody looks at you. It in fact changes the perceptions. So even if you haven't arrived at 10 trillion, people begin to see that, yeah, you're seriously moving towards that 10 trillion. So recognition comes much faster, much sooner. But that is what we got to do. I mean, I see no reason, we have done that for a whole decade, about 8% growth. And now more reforms have already been done. If we really provide proper signals to the investors, I don't see why we cannot do it. I think it is very much a doable thing. And particularly if China can do it, we can do it too.
Just one last question, Dr. Panagariya. In the Indian context, we are seeing in the first half of June, just the beginnings. I don't even want to say green shoots, just the beginnings of some consumer demand coming back, and possibly fueled by the fact that there has been an unlock. So people are physically able to go out and buy more, and it's maybe lifted the mood a bit. Do you think that that's the push that we need for consumer demand to return? And will it have to be fueled by more government spending?
Yeah. So 2 points here. One, very good signs if we are seeing some demand coming back, and I certainly expect that it will come back. People are just waiting for the economy to open up, their wage flows to resume, and so they will come back. But just in case it doesn't happen, meaning that if supply kind of begins to respond, but there's not enough demand, so then there is room for demand to actually generate major supply response. If there is a situation we end up with, I think it has been an excellent thing that the government did not fire all its bullets in one go. In terms of the fiscal side, it remained very conservative. So therefore, I think it will still have a little bit of room left. And at that point, the government can again step in, and the government has been kind of, wait and watch, and it acts depending on how the situation evolves, which is very wise in a situation when things are so bloody uncertain, you just don't know how it is going to evolve. I think the government strategy was excellent, and it still has some ammunition left. So, meaning, even within this fiscal year, it has the ability to spend a bit more. And the states as well, states also get to borrow instead of only 3% of their GSDP, state domestic product, about up to 5%. So states also got some room there. So states, and it's a federation, states have to do their part of it also. So I think demand side, I think we'll be able to overcome. I'm not so much concerned about demand side. I'm more concerned about people getting back to work and supply chains being re-established.
All right, we'll take it one step at a time. And as you said, it's so uncertain right now. We'll really have to figure it as it goes along. But some very important points there, especially on what India's response economically should be to the China standoff. Thank you so much, Dr. Panagariya, for speaking with us.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Tamanna. Thank you.
We'll take a very short break. When we come back, a very, very important story that has been out today. HUL, one of India's largest FMCG brands, has decided to change the names of one of its best-selling line of products. Fair and Lovely will no longer be called Fair and Lovely. They'll drop the name Fair. It's a big move. We discuss the implications and why it's taken so long after the break.